On behalf of the American Meditation Institute, hello and welcome to our first conversation on your conscience with Leonard Perlmutter and our guest tonight, Dr. Mark Pettus. We are delighted that you're here. My name is Jennifer Masters, and I had the privilege of serving as editor of the book that we're launching tonight, Your Conscience. Even if you've read Leonard's first book, The Heart and Science of Yoga, cover to cover, I hope you'll pick up a copy of Your Conscience. If you're a student at AMI, the material will feel familiar, but I think that it might speak to you in a new way and that you may even choose to share it with your non-AMI friends and your family. Your Conscience was written for newcomers and for people in pain. That is to say, it was written for all of us. We're living under extraordinary conditions, extreme and persistent political division, the surge of the Delta variant just when we thought things were going to get back to normal, the climate crisis, the refugee crisis, inequality and discrimination in all their ugly forms, and so many other issues that at times can feel intractable. But on a daily basis, it's often our own private challenges that really zap our energy and cause us to suffer. Here's the good news. The solutions to all of our challenges, personal and global, can be accessed through the conscience, and Leonard's book will help to illuminate that path in the most practical of ways. Our guest tonight is a longtime friend of AMI and a favorite presenter for 7 years at our physician conference, Dr. Mark Pettus. Mark is a triple board certified internist, nephrologist, and integrative medicine physician in practice for over 35 years. Mark received his bachelor's degree from Boston University and his MD from the University of Massachusetts Medical School. His postdoc training was at Harvard Medical School, and he completed his renal fellowship at Mass General Hospital in Boston. Mark currently serves as the Director of Wellness and Population Health at Berkshire Health Systems in Western Massachusetts. He's the author of 2 books, The Savvy Patient, The Ultimate Advocate for Quality Healthcare, and It's All in Your Head, Change Your Mind, Change Your Health. Mark also serves on the teaching faculty at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine based in Washington, D.C., and his podcast, The Health Edge, is heard by people all over the world. In 2018, Mark was the recipient of the prestigious Halbert Dunn Award given by the National Institute of Wellness, widely regarded as one of the highest honors in the health promotion and wellness field. In addition, that same year, he was recognized by the Massachusetts State Senate for his leadership in population and community health in Berkshire County, Western Mass. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight, Mark.
Thank you.
Many of you out there listening are students at AMI and are blessed, as I am, to call Ron Lev your teacher. But for those of you who may be new, I extend a very special welcome. And I also offer this brief introduction so that you know who is here tonight. Leonard is the founder and co-director with his wife, Jenness Cortez Perlmutter of AMI. Together, they are also the originators of National Conscience Month. In addition to teaching at AMI, over the past 26 years, Leonard has served on the faculties of the New England Institute of Ayurvedic Medicine in Boston and the International Himalayan Yoga Teachers Association in Calgary, Canada. He has taught workshops on the benefits of meditation and yoga science at the MD Anderson Cancer Center, Kaiser Permanente, the New York Times Forum on Yoga, multiple nursing and medical schools, and the Association of Graduates of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Since 2009, his 6-week foundation course on yoga science has been certified for CME's continuing medical education credits by the American Medical Association and the American Nurses Association. My personal experience is that he is a wise, kind, and generous yogi who cares deeply for his students. And now to our program. Jenness, who served as the author of Your Conscience, will be the moderator of the conversation this evening and will ask a series of questions that both Mark and Leonard will respond to. We'll leave time at the end for your questions, so please feel free to enter them in the Q&A located at the bottom of your screen at any point throughout the presentation. We can't promise we'll get to all of them, but we'll certainly try. Again, thank you for being here. And with that, I turn it over to you, Jenness. Namaste.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I'd like to add my thanks to each of you for being with us tonight, and to Mark for always being so generous, very generous with your time. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So let's dive right in. And Mark, I want to start with you. We define in this book the conscience in ways that are not always commonly thought of in the general public. I was wondering, how would you personally describe the conscience?
I would describe the conscience as my conscience serves as an interpreter and translator of all the data inputs of my many lives in each and every moment. And so I rely more heavily on this interpretation and translation in everything that I do. And I want to thank Leonard for writing Your Conscience. It's yet another chapter in the many ways that I have learned and developed through your teachings and your writings.
Well, I just would like to start by talking a little bit about my relationship with Mark. As Jennifer mentioned, Mark has been with AMI for 7 consecutive years at our physicians conference, our annual physicians conference, and it's been a lovely relationship. But the personal relationship is what is most precious to me. When I first met Mark and found out a little bit about his early life, I felt that he was a kindred spirit, that we were very close in our attitudes and philosophy toward life. I don't think I'm telling things out of school, but Mark grew up with parents who both were challenged medically, kidney disorder. And it was very painful and traumatic for their entire family. And Mark, not necessarily having been educated in yoga science, as I was not educated in yoga science, began to take a look at his situation and what the possibilities were for his own health. And he decided to make choices that, to the best of his ability, would bring him a healthy life. And so he began studying, he began reading, he began speaking to people. He went to college, he went to medical school, he majored in nephrology at one time, and he was essentially using his conscience, although he might never have even used that word, to guide his path of lifestyle choices that would differentiate him from those that were available to his own parents. And that makes me think of another experience that I've had, and that has to do with a television interview conversation that I've shared with numerous of our students over the years. And this goes back now about 30 years. There was a show on, I can't remember who the moderator was. It might have been Merv Griffin or one of those types of individuals. But I know that the guest was one of the founding presidents of Sony Corporation. And the interviewer was talking to him and said as follows: having read your bio, I see that you've only reached the 8th grade of school. And yet here you are in the middle of your life with all these duties and responsibilities for a multi-million-dollar corporation and all of these many hundreds of thousands of employees. You make very serious choices every day. How do you make these choices with simply an 8th grade education? And the gentleman responded, well, when I have a difficult choice to make, I bring it into my gut. And if it feels right, I go for it. If it doesn't feel right, I pass it by. And both Jenness and I, since that moment, have very lovingly referred to that as the Sony test. But that's really just a synonym for the conscience. And for me, Mark, it has come to my awareness, it was the same type of a human being with the same type of intuitive knowledge available to him that he was able to use to better his life and to better his health, and also to plant the seeds with other people, not only patients, but contemporary colleagues in the medical field. Mark has been a pioneer in that mind-body medicine arena.
Mark, how has your understanding of the conscience influenced the way you work as a physician and as a medical administrator? Can you think of particular ways that you're aware of your conscience having guided you?
That's a great question, Jenness. And I, in addition to thinking in a very different way about my conscience and many aspects of my life, as Leonard briefly alluded to in that wonderful description, I had to, as a Western trained American physician, very early on, it was quite apparent to me that there was a disconnect between my observation and experiences as a physician and the sort of paradigm, the lens through which I was being taught to look at these experiences. And so I've come to think very differently in my understanding of the conscience. And one way in which that thinking has been different is my awareness of the many things in any moment competing for my attention. And particularly over the last few years with this unrelenting pace of change and uncertainty and fear, I've come to appreciate through greater awareness that my conscience really is a bit of a lighthouse. And I am much more explicit in my leveraging those moments of enhanced awareness in most of the decisions that I make. And those decisions might be personal life choice decisions. I've become more aware that how I choose is very much influenced by the stress context of the environment that I'm in. And so having greater conscious awareness of that not only allows me to perhaps choose more wisely, but it also allows me to be more forgiving and understanding when maybe the choice in retrospect could have served me better than I was ultimately being served. I've been in a very interesting place as an overseer of community care in our region, and we have a greater divide between, for example, those who've been vaccinated and those who haven't, and so it's very easy to develop a mindset that vaccination is good, no vaccination is bad. And many narratives emerge, not just with respect to those we serve, but those I work with and friends and family members. And I've come to appreciate that my conscience is a wonderful tool, an asset that can allow me in a very neutral, non-judgmental way to stay in the eye of the needle or the eye of the storm in a way that can both guide others, but to do so in a way that's more empathic and I think understanding, and really polishing that lens. It has allowed me, I think, to have much greater awareness of my conscience as a tool and how effectively it can guide me, in ways that in the past, as Leonard alluded to, I might not have referred to it in that way, but I find that I'm much more aware in every decision that I make.
Thank you.
I too am aware of that all of these factors. And I'm also aware of those factors that interfere with my ability to use the conscience. One of the most eye-opening realizations that I have made in my adult life is the fact that every single decision I have ever made, or that any of us has ever made, any decision that we have made recently, and any decision that we will ever make for the rest of our life is always made by the conscience. Now, the regular culture doesn't understand that, but the conscience is the only function of the mind that can discriminate, determine, judge, and decide. So every time we make a decision, it is made by the conscience for good or less than good. And so there are competing voices, and we've always had a feeling that there were different voices in our minds, but nobody has ever taught us that there were. But there are, and these are the four functions of the mind. So there's the ego, which tries its best to separate me from my essential nature. And what is my essential nature? Aren't I the body? Well, am I this body here in the afternoon of life, or am I that 5-year-old body that I remember? I mean, the body itself is changing every moment, right? Every cell is changing every moment. So which body am I? So anything that changes is not really me. And so that brings me to the mind. Well, maybe I'm the mind. Maybe I'm just a mental being. No, that can't be true, because I can't be an emotion. I can have a relationship with emotion, just like I can have a relationship with a thought or a desire, but I'm not the thoughts. I'm not the desire. So my essential nature is pure consciousness, pure awareness. And within that awareness, within that consciousness, resides an intuitive library of wisdom, the superconscious wisdom from the superconscious portion of the mind that lies beyond the conscious and beyond the unconscious. And so the ego, which is tethered to the reptilian brain, is always dealing with this dreaded fear of annihilation. And that's problematic for us. It can serve us in certain ways when there's definitely a threat, but even an imagined danger is the cause for a fight, flight, freeze reaction, which I believe that most people today are addicted to, and it doesn't reset, which it should. And so we're constantly being poisoned by this cascade of hormones that really does a number on our entire mind-body sense complex. So the ego is one of the major voices. Now, the ego only has a limited perspective. Sometimes it's correct. Like right now, I need a healthy ego to have this conversation. When I drive an automobile, I need a healthy ego. So the ego's not always wrong, but neither is it right. In fact, it's often wrong, but it's never in doubt. And it's loud, and it's pushy, and it's insistent. Why? Because it's afraid of being annihilated. So that's the ego. Then you have the senses. That's another voice. One of the four major functions of the mind, the senses. Now, the senses are very interesting because the mind has the capacity to extrude our creative energy through our eyes, our nostrils, our mouth, our ears, our hands, our feet, to look, to smell, to taste, to hear, to touch. All these objects and relationships in the universe, in this material world, to find out what? To find out what's going to make me happy, what's going to bring me security. Now, this process of extruding our creative energy through the senses is interesting. The analogy that I like to use is the tube of toothpaste. Several times a day, we take the tube of toothpaste and we squeeze it. And gee, gosh, the toothpaste comes out real quick, doesn't it? Very easily. But have any of us ever tried to put the toothpaste back into the tube? Oh, it would be a terrible mess, very difficult. And yet we extrude a tremendous amount of our creative energy unnecessarily in service to desires that ultimately only hurt us. So that's the senses. That's that second voice of the four that are in our mind. Third is the unconscious. This is the repository of all of those concepts that we deem essential to our self-preservation. Things, memories of the past, imaginations for the future. It's all in the unconscious mind. And the unconscious also has a limited perspective. The senses have a limited perspectives, as does the ego. Then there's the conscience, which acts as a mirror that can reflect wisdom from the superconscious portion of the mind. So in every relationship, in order for me to stay in the eye of the storm, like Mark brings up, to be focused and have a mind with equanimity, in order for that to happen, my job in every situation, in every relationship, is to make an appointment with the four functions of the mind: ego, senses, and unconscious mind, and the conscience, and sit them around the kitchen table. And then have a conversation. Dear ego, what is your opinion in this situation? Senses, what are your perspectives? Unconscious, what's your position here? Now, ego, senses, and unconscious mind, now that you have had your say, let's listen to the conscience quietly, without yelling, to what the conscience can reflect from the superconscious portion of the mind. Then it's our job to parent the ego, senses, and unconscious mind by training them to serve the wisdom reflected by the conscience simply for the sake of an experiment, of a scientific experiment, to see for ourselves what the truth is. My experience is, if we don't take on too much too soon, and we don't ask too much of the ego, the senses, and the unconscious mind initially, they all have a rather pleasant experience. If I just finished dinner and the question before all of us is, are we going to brush our teeth? The ego for sure is going to say no. The senses are going to say, I would prefer to have a second piece of apple pie. And the unconscious mind probably is going to say, I'm with the other two. And yet the conscience is going to say, well, you know, we're dealing with not a sprint, but we're dealing with a marathon here of our life. And we need healthy teeth. We need healthy gums. We need a healthy immune system. Why don't we just take a time out for 2 minutes and brush our teeth and see how the experiment goes? And don't you know that the ego has a pleasant experience? It's not so bad as I thought. Same with the senses. The senses, through the tongue, swabs over the teeth. No moss. That's nice. That's a nice feeling, the senses say. And the unconscious mind says, well, that's not too bad. So now we have something to build with. So it's not just anarchy going on in the mind, but rather coordination of these functions in service to the wisdom of the conscience. Then we can be that clock in the thunderstorm.
Mark, thinking about the influence of the mind on physical health and all these aspects of what's going on in our heads. I know that your interest in epigenetics has been very important in your work, and it's been a gift to a lot of people. Could you address the relationship of health in general, as it's determined by our genetic makeup, and how it's altered by the way we use our mind, our senses?
I think there's been a revolution of change in understanding how we function as biologic organisms in relationship to the environments that we inhabit, Jenness. And epigenetics, for those that may not be familiar with that burgeoning field of research, has taken the historical perspective that most of what we encounter in our lives, how long we live, what diseases we might encounter, are largely determined genetically in a very predeterministic fashion. What you inherit sets the stage, and unfortunately, none of us have any ability to influence the cards that we are ultimately given by our parents. Epigenetics has taken that paradigm and essentially turned it on its head through multiple lines of research, from nutrition to thought patterns, emotional patterns, to environmental toxic exposure, through love and compassionate social relationships and connections, through meaning and purpose. Research has suggested in all of these dimensions of our physical lives, we have the ability to influence that which we've inherited in a way that can change ultimately the expression of that inheritance. And so this is really a narrative that speaks to, I think, very much the essence of so much of what I've learned from Leonard, and even quantum physics. Ours is a reality of possibility, infinite possibility. And epigenetics is one way that we are beginning to understand that the infinite array of possibilities in our lives have mechanisms that would suggest that in a very short time, we could take a timeline or a trajectory, or one of the many multiverse realities that we have the potential to be in, and we can very significantly shift those trajectories, shift those timelines, rewrite the narratives in ways that most would not ever even begin to imagine possible. We know that the mind, and Leonard so beautifully translates, in my view, the life sciences, really bridges the science and spirituality. We know that the mind is both embodied. We have this embodied three-dimensional aspect of our mind that, like everything in three dimension, has inherent limitations. We only have 5 senses of what are probably many ways of perceiving our reality, but our design by its very nature poses some limitations and some very powerful biases in how we interpret who we are and how we function. And so we know that the non-embodied mind, what Tesla would have called light, energy, vibration, every worldview, and the Vedic texts all allude to this. They describe this, remind us that ours is a existence of possibility, and each choice brings a consequence that, when embraced wholly, it will teach us something. And so much of what I do as a practitioner and others that I'm engaged with is to help them begin to realize what's possible in their lives. You can't be what you can't see. And so I try to help people begin to see possibility through changes in understanding that are scientifically based, but deeply rooted spiritually. The spiritual paradigms far preceded our modern scientific understandings. And so epigenetics is really a beautiful example of the ways in which we can leverage possibility in our lives. And the mind becomes a powerful, powerful tool. It can also be a very powerful obstacle in creating trajectories that we may believe are real and true, and yet, as Leonard would suggest, they're one of an infinite number of things that we can hold up and interpret in many different ways. So I think this has very much changed the way that the scientific community is beginning to think about, what is possible. But still, these are not easy things to fit into a paradigm that still leverages largely pharmaceuticals and the disease diagnosis treatment paradigm. That construct is still alive and well, but everything that we are talking about here is in some way profound in its capacity to empower the individual. And that's what I love about the work that I do, is it's interesting and evolving. And, my humility has gone here and my ego has gone here, because I realize that most of the things that I've been taught have turned out not to be true, or maybe only partial reflections of the true nature of our reality. And that's an interesting place to be.
So you bring up an extremely important point about this. We can't be what we can't see. And the challenge for all of us is that our perceptions, what we can see, is predicated on our conceptions. So we wind up seeing what we know. So it's got to be that the mind itself is our challenge. The mind is the issue, and yet the mind is also the solution. And if we just step aside from our own mind-body sense complex for a moment, and we take a look at one of our children, namely the computer, which we have created, humanity has created in our own likeness. If we have a great new software package for our computer, it can work lovely. I can become much more creative with this new software package, unless, of course, I have a virus on my hard drive. Then I have to do some inspection, and I have to excise that obstacle to my new software. Well, it's the same thing with the unconscious portion of the mind, this software of the mind, much of which we have picked up from other sources. Our mom, our dad, our grandma, our grandpa, my siblings, my friends, my teachers in school, the culture, celebrities. So that really begs the question, whose life am I living now? Whose life am I living if I'm using other people's concepts to see the world instead of my own ability to see something that could be totally unique and life-enhancing that maybe no other human being has ever seen before to benefit all of humanity? So that's what's so thrilling for me about epigenetics. And back to this kindred spirit that I feel between Mark and myself, he saw that, we all find ourselves in these boxes. The family creates this box, and we're being asked to conform to what the definition of the family is. One of the definitions, a major definition of family, is, well, the family eats the same food all the time. Well, I found out very early that, gee, a lot of the food that my family ate made me sick. So it was a reach for me to go against that and still maintain the love and the respect and the camaraderie of the family community without threatening anybody. For that endeavor, I find that humor is the best medicine to keep people out of their judgments, so that in my case, I could become healthier. And I believe the same thing with Mark and his intuitive ability to make these kinds of choices that change his proclivity for good health, because he was able to move outside a certain box See, the box is not malicious. These families, our age, our religion, our gender, our race, none of them are really malicious, but neither are they always all correct. That's why Shakespeare says, above all else, to thine own self be true. And how do we become true to that self? The conscience can reflect the wisdom of this self, of who we are, having this human experience. If we can parent the ego, the senses, and the unconscious mind to all work together in a holistic manner.
Yeah, that's great, Leonard. And it made me, what came up for me just listening to you is how, depending on how well integrated and distilled those aspects of the mind are, what the output of our conscience can be beliefs that really become the blueprints of the house of our lives that we ultimately construct. And so many times in my own journey, I've come to appreciate not only how powerful those beliefs are in influencing my biology and ultimately my biography, but how malleable those beliefs are. As someone who has had to explicitly bring my ego into check in a Western medical culture, I've come to appreciate just how powerfully the ego can convince one that any belief they have is absolutely true. And so a question that I ask myself often now, I have it on my desk in my office and I have it at home, is it possible that there is something that I believe that has brought me down a path that is miles away from the path that I desire to be on? And what is it that I don't know, knowledge of which could change everything? And through that challenge, through that query, I've and it's true for most of it, you can quickly begin to identify these patterns, right? These narratives, these samskaras that are so deeply etched from this life and probably from many prior lives. And so all of this brings up the awareness of possibility as you can begin to realize that our design, beautiful as it may be, is imperfect in its ability to reveal those truths. And I think part of that is, why being here on this planet at this time is such a challenging learning experience, is because the nature of our design is one that leads us to forget who we are. And until we begin to get closer to defining that, which I know is central to everything that you teach, Leonard, and it's helped me so much through the years to be thinking along those lines. Who am I? You begin to realize that you're not who other people may want you to be or think you should be, and that's an empowering and albeit challenging journey to take for some. Certainly has been for me.
And I find that those possibilities can be realized the more that I commit to the experiment every moment of every day in every relationship. That
Yes.
scientific experiment to find the truth for myself, because essentially, I'm the doubting Thomas. I doubt that things are as they appear, but I'm not going to just believe that. I have to test it in a scientific way to prove to myself through my own personal experience so that I can own the truth. That's critically important.
Beautiful.
So
Yeah.
go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was just going to say, Leonard, so much of this black box of consciousness research, and not to get too geeky, but this rabbit hole of quantum physics, which all of the pioneers of quantum mechanics, Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, Schrodinger, they were all enlightened through the Vedanta,
Right.
that is where they saw their mathematics being
Okay.
described in these beautiful, powerful, rich narratives. And so as I've begun to explore this rabbit hole of consciousness through quantum physics, you realize that what you just described, in that paradigm, we become the architects of our reality. We become the co-creators of the reality that we experience. It's this feed forward, feedback of information that is in perpetual motion and vibration, and the ability to begin to see synchronicities as one begins to align their passion and their values with how they think, feel, and behave. The reality starts to emerge. We might, some might refer to this as, magic, or these mysterious and miracles, when in fact you're defining the true nature of our reality and how it actually works. And I think, again, I not to embarrass you, Leonard, but you translate that as beautifully as anyone that I've ever read or heard. And the science is so right there. And yet I continue to think that quantum, we struggle in our ability in modern medical, certainly Western paradigms, unlike Ayurveda and unlike traditional Chinese medicine, whose very fundamental basis is around those principles. We just have not been able to easily meld this in a way that I think can help people realize just how powerful their minds, their thoughts, their beliefs are. This is not some magical, mysterious, it's how things function.
Yeah. And, just to go to school on a little further on quantum physics and quantum mechanics, that double split experiment that we talk about a lot in our classes, that ultimately our attention, what we choose to give our attention to, can determine how energy can express itself. So this is very profound and very thrilling, because that one-pointed attention, which obviously runs counter to this multitasking philosophy of the culture, which is only to agitate us more so that we'll be so stressed out we have to buy something to take a vacation. But the one-pointed attention is the point of genius and creativity, just like splitting the atom creates an atomic explosion.
Yes.
Well, we can have that metaphorical explosion of creativity simply by learning to focus our attention in a one-pointed manner, to access super conscious wisdom through the conscience.
Beautiful.
So these ideas that we're discussing here bring up the idea of a structured experiment, which we talk about in this book quite a bit. And Mark, I'm addressing this to you. Do you ever recommend structured experiments to your patients? And if so, what kind?
Yeah, always, Jenness. And certainly in my own life, I have been applying what in research communities is referred to as the N=1, N referring to the number of participants in a particular study. Some of the most meaningful research, though it doesn't rate as high in the Western scientific community, is the extent to which an individual contemplates altering something. It may be a thought pattern. That thought pattern, for example, might be, I am a diabetic because my mother was a diabetic and I inherited it, and that's where I'm at. That's the extent of all that's possible. Or they are an individual with a infinite number of health trajectories, one of which was defined by their mother in that example. And as they can begin to connect choice with outcome in a more thoughtful way, they can realize a very different possibility. And so I'm always thinking of ways that people can do that with a relatively short period of observation. So it might be changing a belief or challenging a belief or thought pattern, which I think is one of the most powerful upstream interventions for most. But it might be something more basic, like cutting down on one sugared soft drink each day for the next 30 days, or eating one less processed food per day for the next 30 days, cultivating a mindset of forgiveness in response to a relationship that has been conflicted and painful, implementing a yogic 3-part breath once a day or twice a day for the next 30 days. So it'll be usually a relatively simple, doable intervention, hopefully one that the individual will identify as one that is important to them and that they feel they can accomplish, and then to begin to realize what's happening to them. And that seems so basic and so fundamental. And yet I'm often struck, certainly true in my own life, but in many people that I've worked with, from CEOs to bus drivers, how limited our awareness tends to be of the link between the choice and the experience of the consequence. I've worked at Williams College with many of these students, brilliant, very highly motivated students, very educated and intelligent. Many can't understand or appreciate that what they ate at noon may be influencing their ability to grasp the concept at a 2 o'clock class or lecture. And so these are the kinds of things that I try to help people appreciate. Pick one or two, look at the data. These are really standard quality performance improvement cycles. And I think they can be very powerful in helping people realize in a very short time how they can influence their biology and ultimately their experience of life.
I just want to just jump in here and just add one small thing to this. Just listening to Mark and the power behind his words now. His words here tonight, but also with his own patients and colleagues, it's so powerful because he's walking the walk himself. He's doing the experiment himself. This is not something that he memorized, that he learned in school from somebody else as hearsay and never really checked it out. He's been walking the walk. So this is the truth for him. And when he makes suggestions to a patient or to a colleague, they listen. It has power. Whereas just regurgitating memorized esoterica would never approach that type of power and influence. And people can recognize the difference.
Thank you. And Mark, have you personally found any particular practice that has helped you stay in touch with your own conscience and tap into that wisdom and creativity that is accessed through your conscience?
Yeah, very much so, Jenness. And I offer this not because I'm just in conversation with Leonard and with the AMI family, but some of the most profound tools that I use, I've learned through the American Meditation Institute, from the 3-part yogic breathing, which I apply countless times a day. This is the, it just becomes part of your experience of life. The mantra that Leonard had shared with me many years ago is something I use all the time. Certainly with as tumultuous as the last few years have been, these are tools that for me personally have served as a lifeline. I really like the Nadi Shodhana alternate nostril breathing. It's such an easy technique. And for me, it symbolizes how easily we can activate the hemispheres of our brain through this channel that nature, it's like direct line to our frontal lobes. And so I find the Nadi Shodhana to be really invigorating and grounding practices for me. Certainly my food choices are very much influenced by, and this again is something, Leonard, that you said, that I never forgot. With respect to nutrition, it's the principle of not thinking so much about choosing the foods that you love, but choosing the foods that love you back. And those are very powerful constructs and tools and techniques. And I use them all the time. And I can't imagine life without them.
Oh, you're a good student as well as a good teacher.
Well, and it's,
Can't be a good teacher without being a good student.
Goes together.
yeah, it's yoga off the mat, and it's the japa. It's just a way of life. And that for me has been a noteworthy transformation.
Well, your perspectives are a beautiful way for us to look at the practices that we are involved in now. You brought up a very wonderful points for all of us to consider. Again, we who are interested in this in our daily lives. I want to take just a couple of questions. We do have some questions from people who are viewing this. First one is for you, Mark. As a physician, how are you able to respond to individuals who deny the COVID vaccine is important to public health? Very timely question.
That's a very timely question, and it's a common scenario. Even in our workforce, we have about 20% of our healthcare personnel that, as of recently, have not yet been vaccinated, and so I try to frame any discussion I'm having with someone in as an objective, to the extent that objectivity exists, way as possible, looking at the research that we understand to date, looking at the data that we understand to date. And I feel my imperative as a caregiver is to help an individual be as informed as they can be. Ultimately, it becomes their discernment. It is their life. And so I offer what I can in terms of the data that can inform that decision, understanding that for many people, these are deep issues of spiritual maybe conflict or values conflict. And so I take time to try to understand that and empathize with that and to respond to that in a way that ultimately is not judgmental. And I leave it at that. Some people will choose not to be vaccinated, and I'm sure whatever their reasons are, if they're well informed, will be for them very good reasons. And if there are consequences, well, that's something that people have to continue to grapple with. The public health, it's the social imperative, the social contract that I do feel very strongly about. It very much influenced my decision to become vaccinated. Having a son with special needs and a compromised immune system, and having a 95-year-old mother-in-law that I'm not uncommonly with. And so for me, that social contract from a public health perspective was of high value, and it influenced my decision-making. But that may not always define the ultimate decision that some people make. And so, I leave it at that.
Is it related?
Let me just add something to that. And for myself, in dealing with that type of challenging situation, I think in the moment there really is very little that we can do to convince people in argument about the advisability of becoming vaccinated. But what it does for me is it underscores the realization that we have a major crisis in our educational system. Our education is very good at teaching us how to memorize and recite. but not really through experience and the scientific experiment to learn for ourselves. And so I, through this book and through most of my activities now, are trying to center on influencing educational institutions to recognize that if there's conflict in the mind, if the ego, the senses, and the unconscious mind are driving the bus, then the decision is going to be made by the conscience that just rubber stamps that limited perspective. And very often the outcome is pain. And so we need to teach people tools so that they can learn from earliest ages, all the way through post-grad degrees, how to coordinate the functions of the mind so that we can truly be a holistic human being. I think of the Native American philosophy of the seventh generation. Don't be so myopic in our perspective. Let's take the long view. How is this going to play out over 7 generations? If we don't start now to teach our children and our young adults and people in medical school and in graduate school how to coordinate their functions of the mind, in addition to memorizing and being able to recite so elegantly, then there's just going to be increasing pain, because technology is going to see to that, because technology is creating all of these issues that can be used against us.
Thank you. And thank you again, Mark, for taking the time to join us, to be with us this evening. It was
Pleasure.
a privilege to be with you and to hear your wise and practical advice and the stories of how these ideas have affected your own life. On behalf of the entire family at AMI, I thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.
God bless you. Thank you,
God
Mark.
bless you.
Thank you, Jenness. And I would like to also offer my gratitude as well to Mark and to Ramlev and to Jenness. It was really a wonderful conversation. I took lots of notes thinking about that n=1 experiment. That's really, that's all I can do is just my n=1. So I really appreciate that, and several other things that you said as well. Thank you to everyone out there for joining us, also for choosing to spend this hour with us. We will have a recording of this conversation available within the next week or so on the AMI website. I do have 2 final announcements, and the first is a request. If you found this conversation meaningful, would you please consider making a donation to help AMI cover the costs of publishing Your Conscience? These costs are significant, and they are outside of the typical budget of AMI. That's why we keep asking. That's why you keep hearing us asking. So any size gift makes a difference, and we really would sincerely appreciate that. The easiest way to do that is to visit www.gofundme.com/yourconscience. Secondly, a programming note, we hope to see you in a few weeks on Wednesday, September 22nd at 10:30 in the morning for the next conversation on Your Conscience. And our guest on that Wednesday morning will be Mahima Anand. She is one of the people like Mark who endorsed Your Conscience. Mahima is a prolific storyteller and a documentary filmmaker. She's based in New Delhi, and she's just a lovely person. She will be talking with Leonard about the interplay of the conscience and creativity. I have really enjoyed getting to know her, and I think you will too, so I hope you'll tune in. With that, thank you all again for being with us, and I wish all of you the rest of a delightful evening. Namaste.
Namaste.